What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. And last week, I discussed the Michigan scandal that's going on and how the NCAA recently, I don't know how it was just recently, found out it was Connor Stallion indeed on the Central Michigan sidelines in a ball cap and blacked out sunglasses. What kind of secret agent shit are they pulling? Who knows? I really don't know what's going to happen to the Michigan Wolverines this year in regards to postseason bans, maybe scholarship bans. Who knows what's going to happen with that team? But I also talked about how corrupt the NCAA organization is in general and how that's how they always been. They're always looking out for their money. They don't care about the players whatsoever. They don't care about the coaches. And their favorite whipping boy, Jim Harbaugh, is nowhere to be found anymore in the NCAA, so he's with the Chargers now, and, there's nothing really the NCAA can do about it. I know the NCAA will want to come down hard on Michigan, at least in the university standpoint, maybe a lack of institutional control sort of thing, but at the same time, I don't believe that they're going to strip Michigan of their national championship. I don't believe they're going to give them any postseason ban or anything. But I also talked about how Michigan really isn't that great of a team, in my opinion, especially losing, I would say, at least 70% of their total product from last year's team that won the Natty against Washington. So who really knows what's going to happen with Michigan? I don't know at all, but I don't think the NCAA is going to be too harsh about it. Just because, it happened already. I get it. It's blatant cheating. I do get it. But at the same time, is it really cheating if everyone does it? I mean, a bunch of bodybuilders say the same thing about steroids. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying, the good old Patriot saying. But, Michigan's the only one who got caught doing it. Not Quinn Ewers. The head coach for Texas, I do remember a report coming out recently that, for the longest time, the SEC was thought of or rumored to have paid high school players to come to their university and to play for their college football team. And I think it was Steve Sarkisian of Texas who went out and said, yeah, well, we pay our players now, but we all know that you guys did that back then. And I had suspicions of that for years. There's no way that the SEC is just that good, in my opinion, and light years ahead of every other institution in America. But it's football down south, and everything's always bigger down south when it comes to football and sporting events and everything like that. I also talked about last week that EA College Football 25 made $500 million in less than a month. $500 million in 1 month. I think that has grounds for Game of the Year, in my opinion. I don't know about everyone else, but I would sure give it an award for that matter. And then I also talked about what's the biggest, takeaways from the rookie quarterbacks and where can I see them heading this entire NFL season. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that, especially since preseason of the NFL, week 1 is in the books. Only a couple more weeks until the regular season starts. So we got a full slate today that we're going to talk about. But first of all, as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador. So use promo code SHOW32. Get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. So what are we going to start off with today? Well, we're going to start off with the rookie quarterbacks and the preseason of week 1. So a lot of these quarterbacks, I'm going to be honest, they really impressed. Now, I get it, their stats aren't going to be blown up. Their stats aren't going to be, off the walls, amazing, because the coaches are going to keep their players healthy, of course, like they always do every single year. But let's talk about a little bit what I personally saw when it came to the preseason week 1 games, when it comes to the rookie quarterbacks who were taken in the first round. So, first of all, Caleb Williams looked as good as advertised. I mean, he went 4 of 7 for 95 yards, and he had 1 rush for 13 yards. Again, the stats are not going to be there. It's preseason. We should all know this by now that Everybody does not play a long time in the preseason, sometimes only 1 or 2 series in the entire game when it comes to preseason football. But Caleb Williams, I think, he really advertised what he can do. He really, there's not really much to say other than he's as good as advertised. I really think that Chicago has a bright future with Caleb Williams. I'm honestly surprised that they even played him at all. I didn't think we'd see Caleb Williams until week 1. But again, you do have to give rookie quarterbacks as many reps as they can, as many reps as possible, because they have to be ready for the regular season going up against the starters on every other team. Now, granted, some starters on defense always play, but, with the trend set by Sean McVay years ago, it showed that how much you don't need to play your starters in the preseason. I don't believe in that Super Bowl year with the first year Matt Stafford went to LA, if I remember correctly, Sean McVay benched every single one of his starting players in the preseason and just let them rest. I agree with that in some sense, especially, I can't really argue with it just because they won a Super Bowl that year, but when you look at the grand scheme of things, these games don't mean anything. In my opinion, these games mean more for the people trying to make an NFL roster and the rookies that are coming into the NFL to get used to NFL speed and NFL, hitting. I really don't think the preseason is any benefit for the starters in the NFL. Now, if you have a quarterback controversy, Pittsburgh. If you have, kinks that you need to work out, Denver, Chargers. If you have all that stuff going on with your franchise, then it makes sense to put some starters in there. You have to see what you have, especially when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to talk a little bit about that later because, oh boy, is there a lot I want to say about Pittsburgh. And I'll hold off of what I was going to say, but Caleb Williams, I have a hot take about Caleb. I really do think he'll win Rookie of the Year. I think he's an absolute stud, and I said there would be growing pains, but I think Caleb Williams is talented enough to overcome any inept that the Chicago Bears have. I will make a hot take that Caleb Williams with Chicago will be contending for the NFC North. I really believe it. I seriously believe that with Caleb Williams, this offense is going to just be a well-oiled machine. Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift, a solid offensive line. I think Chicago has their guy. I really do think Chicago finally has their franchise quarterback. This is easily the most talented quarterback that Chicago has ever had in the history of their franchise. Don't give me that Rex Grossman BS made a Super Bowl. Don't give me that Jay Cutler nonsense. None of that BS. Jim McMahon, you can make that argument just because he won a Super Bowl. But if we're being honest, Walter Payton and that 85 Bears defense really carried that team. Listen, I'm not going to knock Jim McMahon because injuries really derailed a lot of what could have been in his career. But he still has to lead the team to a Super Bowl, and Jim McMahon did. Can't say the same about Rex Grossman or Jay Cutler for that matter. But from a talent perspective, there has never been a quarterback in Chicago with this much talent, and that includes Justin Fields. At that point in time, yeah, Justin Fields from a talent perspective was the most talented quarterback the Bears ever had. The way he can run and throw, Justin Fields, when he was with Chicago, now he wasn't the best by any stretch of the imagination, but when it comes to pure talent, running ability and throwing ability, accuracy, pocket presence, Justin Fields had that. But I think Caleb Williams is way better, way more athletic, way more accurate with the football. And personally, overall, Caleb Williams is just a better quarterback and a better leader. I think Chicago struck gold. I think this is a great pick for them, and I think Caleb Williams ends up winning Rookie of the Year this year in the NFL. We'll have to wait and see. I know it's a hot take. I know it's only preseason week 1, heading into week 2 now, but I like what I've been seeing from Caleb Williams. Bo Nix, is he the future of Denver football? I don't know, but he really showed something. 15 of 21, 125 yards and 1 touchdown. So Bo Nix is currently third string, I believe, or fourth string on Denver. Yeah, I don't know about that because the sheer amount of starts that Bo Nix has gotten in his college career between, the Auburn Tigers and Oregon Ducks, Bo Nix has a lot of starting time under his belt, and I think I made the argument, other than Caleb Williams, Bo Nix is the most NFL-ready quarterback, and I think it showed, his calmness in the pocket when, the pressure's on. His accuracy, it's there. 15 of 21 speaks for itself. 125 yards, 1 touchdown. Nothing too flashy, but I definitely think Bo Nix will end up being the starter for Denver. Maybe not this year, but it could be next year. It's like it's honestly like the JJ McCarthy situation. I think he landed in a perfect spot when it comes to, where you would want to fall in the NFL draft. JJ McCarthy, we'll talk a little bit about him, but I'd said before that I felt he landed in the absolute perfect spot when it comes to Kevin O'Connell's led Minnesota Vikings. However, Bo Nix does have Sean Payton, and Bo Nix looked a little bit like Drew Brees. I am not calling Bo Nix Drew Brees, but the way he moves in the pocket and the way he throws the football, I think Sean Payton has his guy. It may not be this year, but Denver needs to move off of Russell Wilson. I know they are still paying him a crap load of money. I know that Denver is still taking a hit for the Russell Wilson contract. But I do think Bo Nix is the future of Denver football. He looked very impressive this past week, and I think he's only going to get better. Obviously, most rookie quarterbacks do. But I definitely think Bo Nix has the potential to start this year. Barring any injuries, I think, obviously he'll sit the bench this year, but injuries happen. It's an unfortunate reality in the NFL. So I think Bo Nix will be ready no matter what. Let's say his number is called in a late game, late injuries, who knows? Who knows where he'll end up on the depth chart, but I definitely think Bo Nix is the future of Denver football. Jayden Daniels showed a little flash, especially on that one deep ball he threw. Again, 2 of 3, 45 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. 1 rush, 3 yards, 1 touchdown. So I'm not of the belief that Jayden Daniels is going to be Lamar Jackson. I know he was compared to Lamar Jackson coming out of the NFL draft. And I get it just because of his maneuverability, his athleticism, his throwing prowess, everything. I get it. He's not Lamar Jackson. Not yet. Could he be? Maybe. I'm not going to put any limitations on that. But Jayden Daniels, with this offense, I really think Washington is going to turn some heads this year. I don't think Washington is to be taken lightly anymore. I think Jayden Daniels, I've always said that how unlikely it is that most first-round quarterbacks will succeed. I know that there's been a couple diamonds in the rough where maybe 1 to 2 or 3 even end up becoming quality starters in the NFL. But 9 times out of 10, we all know that a first-round quarterback, they typically go early to a dysfunctional franchise, to a coaching staff that is on the hot seat, not surrounded necessarily by the best players. So really, it's a death sentence sometimes going early in the NFL draft if you're a quarterback. But I can safely say, out of all the 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round, I think 5 of them will end up being successful. 1 of them not. And that man plays for the New England Patriots. We'll talk a little bit more about New England in a little bit. But Jayden Daniels, as far as I know, he looks good. He looks just like advertised. I think Washington football is going to be on the map this year. Now, I'm not saying playoffs. I'm not saying wild card. But when it comes to the NFC East, who knows? Maybe they'll challenge Dallas for that second spot. And who knows? Maybe they'll even challenge Philadelphia because there's some issues going on in Philadelphia, especially some rumors that Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni are not getting along whatsoever. And I've talked about this. I think Jalen Hurts has to have a big year if he wants to get paid because I think as time goes on, the further away that Shane Steichen is from Jalen Hurts, you see Jalen Hurts' mechanics are off. He's more turnover prone. He's less patient with the football. I really do think that Jalen Hurts needs to show out this year, possibly even get to an NFC championship. He can't get blown out by the Buccaneers again in the wild card. That's just unfathomable. I stuttered there so bad, but it's okay. But the more Jalen Hurts is away from Shane Steichen, I think the worse of a quarterback he is. Shane Steichen's doing great things with Anthony Richardson. You watch, the Colts are going to be something, they're going to be some team to take serious this year, that's for sure. But in regards, Jayden Daniels in the NFC East, I'm just saying, I think Washington is locked and loaded. This is a completely different roster. This is a completely different culture. This is a completely different franchise that Jayden Daniels otherwise would be walking into with Dan Snyder at the helm if he was still the owner. Now, we all know what a slimy piece of work that Dan Snyder is as a human being. We all get that. But he's walking into a completely different culture. He's walking into a completely different organization now. I think Washington has a chance to turn some heads in the NFC East, especially when it comes to Dallas. I do think Dallas is going to struggle against Washington, but I do think Philly might have a little bit too much firepower for Washington to handle, especially with the addition of Saquon Barkley. So, Philadelphia 1, Washington 2, and then Dallas and obviously the Giants. So we're going to talk a little bit about New England now. Just quarterbacks. We have a little bit more about New England in a little bit. But is Drake Maye worse than the Patriots' 7th round quarterback pick, Joe Milton? I watched Drake Maye in college a lot more than I watched Joe Milton. Drake Maye, because he played Miami all the time, and obviously I'll watch every one of those games, but when it comes to Drake Maye, yeah, people were hyped about him. He looks like Justin Herbert, throws like Justin Herbert. Yeah, well, his mechanics are off. His mechanics are garbage. His accuracy is spotty at best. And also New England has nobody he can throw the ball to. Or do they? Because Joe Milton is outperforming Drake Maye by a mile. Now, I know they want to gradually bring Drake Maye along. I know they think he's a franchise guy eventually, but he's the one quarterback I feel like will be a bust. Not only does he enter a defensive culture led by Gerard Mayo, the new head coach of New England, which is basically Bill Belichick. It's the same damn system. Nothing has changed in New England. Their roster is just a little bit more talented, I would say, but not necessarily better. I'm a firm believer of this is an offensive-driven league, obviously. So you need the right person at the helm leading the charge. Some defensive head coaches I give a pass to because of how much success they've had in the NFL in general, like Mike Tomlin and Pete Carroll. Those guys get a pass from me, but they don't have offense completely figured out. But they're still such great coaches that they still win in the league. So that doesn't really matter. But as far as I'm concerned, Joe Milton is way better than Drake Maye. Joe Milton is a way better quarterback than first-round pick Drake Maye. And Joe Milton was taken in the 7th round. And now, why do I say this? Because out of the few games I've watched Joe Milton play in his college career, by far the biggest one I watched was when he went up against Alabama and beat them. Joe Milton showed up and showed out against Alabama. And Drake Maye struggled against ACC opponents. Like I said earlier, I don't know how the SEC got so good so long ago, but it's no secret that the SEC is the best conference in college football. And Joe Milton was going up against defenses that Drake Maye has never seen before, or the quality of defense Drake Maye has never seen before. The SEC defenses are about as close as you can get to a real NFL defense. It's not quite there, but it's pretty close. The ACC defenses that North Carolina faced, those don't compare to the defenses in the SEC. The only defenses in the ACC that really are comparable to an SEC defense, Miami, Florida State, Clemson, and Louisville. Those are the only teams that consistently can put out a defense that will rank top in the nation. Other than that, it's usually Ohio State or Michigan. We all know that from the Big Ten. And then the rest are SEC schools. So we understand the level of competition in the SEC is way better than anything Drake Maye has seen in the ACC. But right now, Joe Milton looks like a better option than Drake Maye, especially after watching the training camp highlights and everything. Joe Milton just looks like a better quarterback than Drake Maye. It happens. There's always one quarterback or a few that are busts, that are guaranteed busting in the NFL. That's it. It happens. But I think New England might have their guy, and it isn't the first-round pick they spent on Drake Maye. It's the seventh-round pick, Joe Milton from Tennessee. So we'll see how it goes. But from here on out, I definitely think Joe Milton has the nod. Obviously, Jacoby Brissett's going to start the year, but in regards to transitioning to another quarterback, I definitely think Joe Milton will get the nod over Drake Maye, especially if he keeps performing like he is right now. All right, the last rookie quarterback we're going to talk about, Michael Penix also did well, but wasn't really notable in my eyes compared to the other rookie quarterbacks that played this weekend. But JJ McCarthy looks a lot better than I anticipated. 11 of 17, 188 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, 2 rushes for 18 yards. And he connected on that beautiful deep ball we all saw. But I said this before. I thought JJ McCarthy was a little bit of a project quarterback. He's a little bit of a product of Michigan and Jim Harbaugh. But I also did say he landed in the perfect spot when it comes to Kevin O'Connell's led Minnesota Vikings. Great receivers, great offensive line, great backs, and a solid defense. Minnesota, I already said they were primed and locked and loaded and ready to go to make some noise in the NFC this year, and I think J.J. McCarthy will end up getting that nod, and he looked really good. The accuracy is there, but that's something he never really struggled with in a Jim Harbaugh Michigan-led system. 1 interception, okay, everybody has growing pains, everybody throws picks. But his efficiency looked great, especially in that accuracy on that deep ball for that touchdown. He looks good. He looks like he's a starter in the NFL. Now, maybe it's an overreaction, maybe. But realistically, like I said before, he landed in the perfect spot. Kevin O'Connell's led Minnesota Vikings are the perfect system for J.J. McCarthy to grow and mature as a quarterback in the NFL. So I think the sky's the limit for J.J. McCarthy and the Minnesota Vikings right now. There will be growing pains. I'm not saying they're going to the Super Bowl this year, but later down the line, who knows? I think J.J. McCarthy is the guy going forward in Minnesota, especially because he's surrounded by, the best supporting cast probably in the NFL that you could ask for. So those are the rookie quarterbacks I talked about. I mentioned I thought Caleb Williams will win Rookie of the Year. I will say their schedule kind of lines up for them. All right, so they got week 1 at Tennessee. I think that's a win. Not at Tennessee. They're home against Tennessee. I think they beat Tennessee. Tennessee's awful. Will Levis and Calvin Ridley just now got on the same page when it comes to throwing the football to each other, so I don't know how well Tennessee's going to be. I think they're going to be fighting for a top 3 draft pick next year. But then they go to Houston, that's a loss. And then at Indianapolis, that's going to be a feisty game. I think they win that. Los Angeles, I think they lose. Carolina, they will win. Jacksonville, I am not high on the Jaguars anymore. I really am not. I think Caleb Williams beats them. Then they got their bye week. Then they go to Washington, depending how they look. This is obviously super early, but they have a puncher's chance in that game. They'll beat Arizona. They'll beat New England. I think they will split with Green Bay. They will split with Minnesota, but I don't think they beat Detroit twice. San Francisco, they'll lose to them. But then they'll beat Seattle. So realistically, they're looking at 9 wins maybe, 8 or 9 wins. I think that's a realistic expectation for the Chicago Bears right now. It's not quite enough to get into the playoffs, maybe, depending on how the rest of the NFC shapes up. But, in the first year, I think Caleb Williams will, he'll show flashes, but he'll also struggle a little bit, especially against those good defenses like Houston, like LA, like even Green Bay is a very feisty defense. Same thing with Detroit and San Francisco, obviously. They'll struggle mightily against those teams, but I think they have a puncher's chance in pretty much every single game except Houston and San Francisco, so we'll see. But I did want to mention that. All right, so now we're going to transition into something else, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers debacle. At least I like to call it a debacle. Are the Steelers in trouble? Yes, I really think they are. They have a great cast around them. I really like the roster itself. I seriously hate the quarterback position. I really do. So this past weekend, when they played Houston, Russell Wilson did not play. Justin Fields did. He went 5 of 6 for 67 yards, but he also had, that fumble on the exchange between the center and quarterback, which you can't have that. Kyle Allen went 17 of 23 for 193 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Kyle Allen looked like the best quarterback on Pittsburgh right at that moment in time. But I know it's all backups in the league. I know Kyle Allen's a journeyman quarterback. I get that. But I will say I am very, very nervous about this quarterback situation in Pittsburgh. Was Arthur Smith really the right choice as a offensive coordinator? I don't know. He's an offensive guy. I get that. He's better than, I think anything was better than Matt Canada at this point, but, eventually I could be wrong. I really could be. But the fact of the matter is he got fired from Atlanta, because, and if we're being realistic, Arthur Smith, I've criticized him for a long time, especially with the amount of weapons that he had available to him in Atlanta. Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Drake London. Atlanta didn't have many holes. Quarterback was a big issue. Taylor Heineke, Desmond Ridder, awful, and Marcus Mariota the year prior. I get it that they had to bench Marcus Mariota 2 years ago to see what they had with Desmond Ridder. I don't get what they saw. I would have rather run it back with Marcus Mariota than, run it with Desmond Ridder last year, But now Atlanta has Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix eventually in the pipeline. But when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, Arthur Smith was so inept as a head coach in Atlanta. He was truthfully awful. He was bad. His play call, his play design was awful. And we kind of saw that in the first preseason game. There are a bunch of Steelers that want him fired already. I'm not willing to say that yet, but I will say after week 1, I'll know whether or not I want to fire Arthur Smith if I was the GM or the owner of Pittsburgh. That game against that game at Atlanta is going to say so much about this Pittsburgh Steelers team. I'm not worried about the defense. The defense is never going to be an issue. As long as Mike Tomlin's there, the defense is going to be fine. The defense will be top 10 and top 5 in the NFL in pretty much any and all categories. But when it comes to the quarterback situation, based off that calf strain that Russell Wilson is coming off of, I think still there's a legit shot. I know there's still a couple more weeks until September 8th when Pittsburgh does play at Atlanta, but I will say Justin Fields definitely has a shot to be the starter. Justin Fields didn't do horrible, but he didn't do as good as I would like to have seen him. But again, it is, it was Houston. Houston's pretty solid, but again, we got to wait and see. Pittsburgh's schedule is brutal this year. Easily one of the toughest schedules in the NFL, probably top 2. So they open up with Atlanta, then go to Mile High Denver. Then they're home against the Los Angeles Chargers, so they're going to be better. Then they go to the Colts with Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen. Then they're home against Dallas, at Las Vegas, then home against the Jets, and then home against the Giants. Then week 9, they have their bye. Every game from that point on is going to be a dogfight, and I can realistically, I know it's not going to happen because it's damn near impossible to go, lose every single game in the NFL. unless you're Cleveland, of course. But realistically, when it comes to seeing every single team they play, I can seriously see Pittsburgh losing all of them but one, the Raiders. Well, then again, the Raiders have always played Pittsburgh tough. Okay, realistically, I could see Pittsburgh in some scenario. They realistically have a puncher's chance to win every game and lose every game. But the back end of the schedule, week 9, they have their bye. Week 10 through 18 is a brutal gauntlet. At Washington, then home against Baltimore, at Cleveland, at Cincinnati, home against Cleveland, at Philly, at Baltimore, home against Kansas City on Christmas Day, and then home against Cincinnati. That is the most brutal back end of an NFL schedule I have ever seen in my entire life as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I can realistically see Pittsburgh finally having their first losing season under Mike Tomlin, and I don't care what my Pittsburgh Steelers friends like to say about that or my friends in Pittsburgh say about that. Listen, I'm a realist. I'm realistic about the expectations we place on this football team, the realistic expectations we put on Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Arthur Smith, Mike Tomlin, the entire organization as a whole. Realistically, this team is not built for the Super Bowl. Realistically, this team could very well lose the last half of their schedule. I'm a brutally honest Steeler fan, but we are going to the Super Bowl. Have to keep the cultural norm. So is Pittsburgh in trouble? I'd say so. If the first preseason game with any indication, I don't trust Arthur Smith whatsoever to deliver any kind of good this year as offensive coordinator for Pittsburgh. All right, we're going to talk. I said we would talk a little bit more about New England. So I mentioned how I thought Drake Maye was worse than Joe Milton, and I think Joe Milton has a legit shot to be the franchise guy eventually. Excuse me. I definitely think Joe Milton will get the nod to be New England's franchise guy eventually. But who do they really have to throw to? I mentioned that New England as a culture is still a defensive culture. The head coach is Jayden Daniels, basically a Bill Belichick clone when it comes to scheming and play design and culture setter. You know, Jayden Daniels is basically the same as Bill Belichick. Nothing's really changed in New England, except the roster might be a little bit better or a little bit worse, depending on how you look at it. But I talked about how do Drake Maye, Jacoby Brissett, Joe Milton, do any of these guys really have a puncher's chance at succeeding in New England? I will say, depending on who you ask, that's a hard no. If you look at their wide receiving core, I have their wide receivers right here. I left like 2 or 3 off, but those are guys that are realistically not going to see the field. But they have Kendrick Bourne, KJ Osborne, Jalen Polk, Jalen Hurd, and Tyquan Thornton. And they recently just cut Juju Smith-Schuster. You got a bunch of 3 and 4s as your starting wide receiving group. That's the reality of New England. The best one out of that bunch is KJ Osborne. He actually showed some things back in Minnesota. He was a great second and third option. He was a great third option when Adam Thielen was still there. And then when Adam Thielen left, you know, he became a number 2 and number 3. You know, he was a good complementary piece, especially last year to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, you know, the rookie from USC last year. But realistically, you know, KJ Osborne, I think he's a great wide receiver. Not great, but I think he's a solid number 3 option. But Kendrick Bourne, not really much there. Jalen Hurd, nothing really. Jalen Polk, rookie from Washington, he has potential, but he's a rookie. And Tyquan Thornton, I'll be honest, I haven't heard of him since I looked him up and looked up the New England wide receiver roster. And they recently just cut Juju Smith-Schuster. So you have no veteran leadership in that wide receiving room. Now, I'm not saying Juju was the Juju of Pittsburgh, which I think and hot take Steeler fans, you got to get this through your damn head, is that the reason Juju was so good is because Antonio Brown was there and took all the double coverage. We get that. It's blatantly obvious, especially after AB left and Juju came in to be the number one. He still did fine. Juju's easily a 1B to a number 2 wide receiver on any good NFL team. He's not a number 1, but he's definitely better than everything else New England has. I really don't understand why the Patriots would cut Juju. You could have easily traded him, got something for him. Even if that was a 7th round pick, you could have got something for him rather than just cut him for nothing. But in regards to the rest of the wide receiving core, they got KJ Osborne, who's a solid receiver. Not a number 1, but he's solid. And then nothing else. And a rookie. And realistically, I don't even know who their running backs are. But I do know Pro Football Focus rates it as one of the worst in the NFL. So you have one of the worst running back cores in the NFL. You have the worst receiving core in the NFL, according to PFF, ranked 32nd out of 32 teams. And you have an okay offensive line. In a defensive culture that hasn't really changed or pivoted to an offensive-driven league. What are the Patriots doing? I think they're in for a long year. I don't see really any sense. I really don't see Drake Maye being able to succeed here. Now, I thought he was going to be a bust anyway because there's always one quarterback who's a bust every single time in the first round. So I think he's going to be a bust either way, but they definitely, Joe Milton, Jacoby Brissett, and Maye, they really don't have a puncher's chance in the NFL right now. They really, seriously, don't really have much of a chance to succeed at all in the NFL right now. As the wide receiving core is currently slated, as it's currently built, New England's not a winning football team. They're going to be competing for the first overall pick in next year's draft. And by God, I hope they draft a receiver or some skill position player because New England has been allergic to that for the better part of 5 to 7 years. All right, so we're going to move on to our final topic today, and I'm going to talk about some of my college football hot takes. College football is just about 2.5 weeks away. It's going to be a fun time, especially week 0 and week 1. We got some good college football games coming up, but I'm going to make my college football hot takes. I have about 4 hot takes I'm going to make, and I'll explain why they're hot takes. Well, obviously, you know what a hot take is. Unlikely to happen or controversial to say. Realistically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my hot takes. First hot take. USC will make the college football playoff with Miller Moss at quarterback and Lincoln Riley at head coach. Yes, I think USC will do what Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams could not do. Now, granted, this is a 12-team playoff now, not a 4-team playoff anymore. But when it comes to USC, I solely believe that they will make the college football playoff with Miller Moss at quarterback. Because if you look at what Miller Moss did in his first career start, again, in last year's bowl game, he threw for over 400 yards. Lincoln Riley always will have the offense ready to go. That's what Lincoln Riley does. Lincoln Riley will always be an offensive savant, and he will always have the players necessary to put out there on any given Saturday. He has quality NFL-level players on the offensive side. Defense is a completely different issue. Lincoln Riley don't know defense. That is not his side of the ball. That is not his specialty. USC's defense is going to be probably worse than last year, if we're being realistic. But when it comes to the offense, it looked like they didn't skip a beat in the bowl game when Caleb Williams decided to sit out and prepare for the NFL draft. Miller Moss looks like he's going to be one of the top quarterbacks picked in next year's draft. Who knows? We'll see. But they open up with LSU. LSU does not have Jayden Daniels anymore or Malik Neighbors. LSU is significantly worse than what they were last year with Heisman Trophy Jayden Daniels. So I think they start off 1-0. Utah State, they can beat Utah State. That's 2-0. At Michigan, this will be the first real test because Michigan always does have a good defense. I'm going to say they lose at Michigan because it's at Ann Arbor. That's a long, long flight for USC to take from Southern California to Ann Arbor, Michigan. That's a long flight. And when Michigan is packed, it's one of the best atmospheres in college football. So I think Michigan hands USC their first loss of the year. But when it comes to Wisconsin, Minnesota, Penn State, Maryland, Rutgers, at Washington, Nebraska, UCLA, and Notre Dame, realistically, USC can win every single one of those games. The only ones that I think they'll struggle with realistically are Penn State and Notre Dame. But they're home against Penn State and they're home against Notre Dame. The schedule lines up. I think they'll go 9-3, 10-2. At that point, maybe they're, in contention for the Big Ten championship. But, with Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, I get it that they're loaded. The Big Ten's loaded now. But, you don't have to make the conference championship to get into the college football playoff anymore. Now, it's nice if you win your conference. Then you get that automatic bid, one of the top 4 seeds. But realistically, USC can definitely make the playoff this year. All right, so we're going to move on to our next topic. Ohio State will fire Ryan Day. I don't know when it's going to happen or if it's going to happen, but my hot take is, and my gut tells me that this is Ryan Day's last chance as head coach of Ohio State football. He's 1-3 against Michigan, which we know. I said it multiple times. If Ryan Day loses to Michigan this year, his ass is fired before they even get back to the locker room. His ass is fired on the field. He should just pack his bags. If he loses to Michigan this year, of all years, with a loaded Ohio State team compared to a depleted Michigan team, Ryan Day will be fired before they even get off the field. But I definitely think this will be Ryan Day's last year because I think he does have to at least get to the national championship in order to keep his job. There's just been too many failures recently that, the Ohio State boosters, they look at all this stuff. How many national championships are you winning? Well, he has none. But I will say that he is undefeated against everybody else in the Big Ten. I do think that changes this year. But he does, I believe, I think Ryan Day, he's a good coach. He's a great coach, in my opinion. Undefeated against the rest of the Big Ten, except Michigan. Multiple conference titles, but does not have that college football playoff win. He does not have that national championship. And I think that's what's going to set the Ohio State boosters off. I think this is Ryan Day's last year as Ohio State's head coach. Texas will win the SEC. Now hear me out. Texas moving to the SEC with Oklahoma. Oklahoma is not necessarily as good as people think. Jackson Arnold at quarterback with a defensive head coach. But Steve Sarkisian, Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning in the pipeline. I definitely think Texas is primed, locked, and loaded against the entire SEC this year. Their biggest tests, their biggest roadblocks are Alabama and Georgia. But I do think Georgia takes a step back and Alabama takes a step back. They're going to be fine. They're going to be competing for the college football playoff and the SEC title. But I don't necessarily think they're going to be the dominant teams that we know them to be from years past. Kalen DeBoer comes into Alabama. They still have Jalen Milroe. But I don't necessarily believe Jalen Milroe is, all that. He was a freshman last year. I get it. But, we'll see. But I think Texas, from top to bottom, has the best roster in the SEC, and I think they win it. Final hot take. Miami will make a run at the college football playoff championship. The schedule lines up for them. That's all I can say. Cam Ward, Sam Brown, Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, Mark Fletcher, Damian Martinez, a top 10 offensive line, a top 10 defensive unit. Miami is locked and loaded and ready to go. This is the most talented roster I think Miami has had probably in a long, long time. Hot take, the Miami Hurricanes, surprising, are going to make a run at the college football title this year. And that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up, it's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up, so